She did not call King Charles. She did not call Camilla. She did not request a family meeting. She did not give Tom Parker Bowles any opportunity to get ahead of the story. She went directly to lawyers. And that single decision, bypassing her own brother, the King of England, tells you more about the fault lines inside that palace right now than any carefully worded statement ever could. Princess Anne has reportedly taken legal action against Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's 50-year-old son, over allegations connected to Balmoral Castle. Not the Crown Estate, not a government property. The most privately sacred piece of ground the Windsor family owns, the 53,000-acre Scottish Highland estate, where Queen Elizabeth spent every summer of her reign. The place where Anne sat at her mother's bedside on the 8th of September 2022, the last place Elizabeth ever saw. And the allegation being reported is not a misunderstanding or a scheduling conflict or a family disagreement about how the property should be maintained. The allegation is that Tom Parker Bowles was allegedly using Balmoral as a luxury commercial venue, offering elite-paying clients private access to the late Queen's personal sanctuary. Access nobody was supposed to be selling. Access that nobody outside the royal family was supposed to have at all. When Anne found out, sources say she went completely still. Not angry, not loud, still. Those who know her say that is the most dangerous version of Anne, the silence that comes just before she decides exactly what she is going to do. Welcome to the Marquee Report. This is the full story of what is being reported at Balmoral and why the battle over one Scottish estate has become the most explosive internal royal dispute in years. Before we get into what allegedly happened, let's establish who Tom Parker Bowles is, because his position within the royal orbit is the key to understanding how this situation was reportedly possible. Tom is 50 years old. He is a respected food writer and critic who has published several well-received cookbooks and built a genuine career entirely separate from his mother's royal life. He is charming, well-connected, and moves comfortably through London's most elite social circles. By most accounts, he is a perfectly capable and successful private individual. He is also not a member of the royal family. He holds no royal title. He carries no official position within the monarchy. When Camilla married King Charles in April 2005, Tom did not become a royal. He became the king's stepson, a private citizen with extraordinary access. And there is a meaningful difference between being welcomed into royal spaces as family and treating those spaces as your own personal asset. According to sources close to the situation, the line between those two things is exactly what Princess Anne believes Tom crossed. Tom's career as a food writer and critic has connected him to some of the wealthiest, most influential people in Britain and beyond. He understands luxury. He understands exclusivity. He understands precisely what certain people will pay extraordinary amounts of money to experience. And Balmoral, to the right audience, represents something almost impossible to put a price on. The late Queen's private sanctuary, untouched by tourism, inaccessible to the public, steeped in more than a century of the most intimate royal history imaginable. Here is what sources are reporting about what was allegedly found and how it came to Anne's attention. Late autumn 2023. No official royal visits scheduled. No public engagements. No announced arrivals. And yet, according to sources familiar with the situation, vehicles were moving through the private roads of the Balmoral estate. Not royal protection vehicles, not estate maintenance crews following their normal routes. Something different, something that had no business being there. Staff noted the unusual activity and logged it, but Balmoral employs hundreds of people across its farms, properties, and maintenance operations. Not every unusual observation reaches the top of the chain immediately. Some things sit quietly until someone asks the right question. Anne asked the right question. Sources suggest she had been making her own quiet inquiries about the estate in the months following her mother's death. Not formally, not through official channels. simply as a daughter who loved that place and wanted to ensure it was being properly protected during the transition to Charles's ownership. And during those inquiries, the flagged vehicle activity came to her attention. What she allegedly uncovered is where the story shifts from unusual to deeply serious. According to sources, the vehicles were connected to a series of private visits allegedly arranged for paying guests. Elite clients, the kind of people for whom money is no obstacle and exclusivity is the only currency that matters. Private, unauthorized, deeply exclusive access to the grounds of Balmoral Castle. Walks through estate land that no public visitor has ever set foot on. The extraordinary, almost indefinable experience of being somewhere the entire world knows exists, but virtually nobody outside the royal family ever sees up close. Sources suggest the fees involved were not modest. This was not a casual arrangement between friends. This had the structure, the pricing, and the discretion of something organized deliberately. And the name allegedly connected to organizing it, Tom Parker Bowles. Here is the context that makes this allegation so significant. Because this is not any property. This is the one place that carries the most emotional weight of any royal estate in existence. Balmoral Castle sits across 53,000 acres of Scottish Highland terrain. Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, purchased it originally, and it has been privately owned by the royal family ever since, passing from monarch to monarch outside any government control or public ownership. But beyond the history and the acreage, Queen Elizabeth had a relationship with Balmoral that was unlike her connection to any other place in the world. It was the one place on earth where she could simply breathe, away from the cameras, away from the protocol, away from the relentless machinery of the monarchy. She spent every summer there for decades without interruption, and it was at Balmoral, on the 8th of September 2022, that Queen Elizabeth drew her final breath. Anne was present at her mother's bedside. That moment made Balmoral something untouchable for the Princess Royal, in a way that goes beyond any formal royal duty. Anne does not wear her grief publicly. That is not her way, but those closest to her have noted that her attachment to Balmoral deepened significantly after her mother's death. She has been fiercely protective of it, in ways that go beyond anything her official role requires. So when the allegation emerged that the late Queen's private sanctuary had allegedly been commercialized, that paying clients had allegedly walked those grounds, Anne's response was never going to be a quiet conversation over dinner. Here is the decision that reveals everything about Anne's assessment of the situation. She did not call Charles first. Sources are entirely consistent on this point. She went directly to royal legal counsel, and Charles found out from his lawyers, not from his sister, not from a quiet conversation, from lawyers who had already been contacted and were already moving. The reasoning, according to those familiar with her thinking, was straightforward and brutal in its clarity. Charles loves Camilla. That is not a secret, and it is not a criticism. It is simply a fact that has defined the last 3 decades of his life. And in Anne's assessment, going to Charles first would have given the situation an opportunity to be quietly managed, softened, absorbed into the machinery of palace diplomacy, the way so many uncomfortable royal realities have been absorbed before. Anne did not want it softened. Balmoral was her mother's home, her mother's refuge. The place where the Queen spent her last hours, surrounded by the land she loved most in the world. And Anne had one position on what had allegedly happened there. It was not a family matter, to be resolved over dinner. It was a legal matter. Full stop. By the time Charles fully understood what was happening, Anne had a head start of several days. The Princess Royal had initiated legal proceedings connected to the king's private estate without telling him first. That is not a small statement. That says plainly that Anne did not trust the situation to be handled correctly if Charles knew about it first. Charles understood exactly why. Because he knew what his own instinct would have been. Here is where the palace dynamics become genuinely explosive. Because Camilla's reaction to Anne's legal move was reportedly not calm acceptance. Sources describe it as fury, not necessarily about the substance of the allegation, but about the method. Anne had gone to lawyers without a single conversation, without a phone call, without even the basic courtesy of a warning. In Camilla's view, according to sources, this was not Anne protecting Balmoral. This was Anne using a legal mechanism to humiliate her son and, by extension, to humiliate her publicly and irreversibly. Charles was caught completely in the middle. On one side, his sister, a woman whose integrity he has respected his entire life, a woman who was present when their mother died, telling him something genuinely serious allegedly happened at the estate he inherited. On the other side, his wife, the woman he chose above everything else, whose children he has welcomed into his life and his home. There was no version of this situation where Charles could make both of them happy. And then William made his position known. Sources suggest that within days of Anne's legal move becoming known inside the palace, William had already aligned himself, privately directly, with Anne. Completely, this connects to a pattern. When William inherited the Duchy of Cornwall after Queen Elizabeth's death, Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot, an interior designer on the royal payroll for nearly 2 decades, quietly disappeared from the duchy's financial accounts. No announcement, no dispute on the record, just gone, replaced by people from William's own inner circle, his children's godparents given roles connected to the estate. The message required no translation then, and it requires no translation now. Step back from the specific allegation and look at what this situation actually represents. Because Balmoral is the visible edge of a much larger conflict. The question it forces is fundamental. Who actually belongs inside the royal family's most private spaces? Not legally, not constitutionally. In the deeper, more human sense of the word. When someone marries into the royal family, their children from previous relationships enter a complicated gray zone. They are family in the personal sense. They attend dinners. They appear at private gatherings. They are welcomed into homes the rest of the world will never see. But they are not royals. They hold no titles. They carry no official responsibilities. And crucially, they operate without the formal oversight structures that govern the behavior of working members of the royal family. Tom Parker Bowles has always existed in that gray zone. And sources suggest the Balmoral situation has forced a conversation that nobody wanted to have, but everybody knew was coming eventually. What are the actual boundaries for people in that position? What access are they entitled to? What oversight applies to them? And what happens when those boundaries are allegedly crossed? Sources suggest William is now pushing for formal written guidelines governing the access and conduct of non-royal family members in relation to crown and privately owned royal properties. Not suggestions, not informal understandings, actual written boundaries with actual consequences. The monarchy has always operated on unwritten rules, on tradition, on the assumption that family members, however loosely defined, understand implicitly what is and is not acceptable. William's argument, according to sources, is that the Balmoral situation proves exactly why implicit understanding is no longer sufficient. Here is where everything stands right now. Princess Anne has reportedly taken legal action against Tom Parker Bowles over alleged unauthorized commercial use of Balmoral Castle. She bypassed King Charles entirely in doing so. Charles found out from his lawyers. Camilla's reaction was reportedly furious. William has aligned himself with Anne. Tom Parker Bowles's access to private royal spaces is, according to sources, effectively finished. Charles is reportedly caught between everyone he loves with no good options. And William and Anne, standing together on the same side of this for arguably the first time in memory, are not moving. Balmoral was never just a castle. It was Queen Elizabeth's soul, the place she loved most, the place she never truly left. And Anne, who held her mother's hand as she drew her final breath on those grounds, has apparently decided that whoever else may feel they have a claim on access to that estate is going to encounter something they did not expect. The most disciplined and principled member of the British royal family. And she has lawyers. This has been the Marquee Report. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. See you on the next one.